Hi everyone, Elsie Jensen here. Today we are going to be prepping our dinner tonight. We have got oxtail stew, which we'll braise off and then we'll slow cook in the oven. And then we're going to make two types of sourdough. We're going to make our basic recipe and then we're going to make a Guinness beer sourdough for tomorrow. Okay, for our oxtail stew, look at these beautiful, first of all, this oxtail. They were just so gorgeous at the store, I couldn't pass them up. We're going to take our bacon and we're going to give it a chop, and then we're going to put it in our Dutch oven and we're going to let it get a little bit crispy. And then we'll start prepping our sourdoughs. So let's get the bacon out. You could also use pancetta if you have it, but I find bacon works great for this as well. And I'm just giving it kind of a big chop. It doesn't need to be super small. We're using it for, kind of the bacon grease to season our stew up, which we'll serve over some mashed potatoes later. And there we go. I'm going to turn my Dutch oven on to about a 7 out of 10, so like a medium high. We're going to put our bacon in here. There we go. Use my tongs to kind of toss them up, and now we're just going to let them simmer. I'm going to give my hands a quick wash, and then we're going to start on our bread. Okay. So we're going to be making our sourdoughs. One, we're going to be using with some Guinness beer. I poured it out because I wanted to warm it up because I like to use warm liquid with my sourdoughs because it incorporates the flour into it. So we're going to start out by adding 100 grams of active starter to each one of our bowls. Let me get a little paddle. Look, it was very bubbly. It actually came all the way up to my cheesecloth, but you can see all those bubbles on it. You can tell it's nice and active. Let's give it a little stir. It's very full. So we're going to have to do some discard recipes soon. We're going to need 100 grams of active starter. Here we go. And then we're going to put 100 grams in this bowl, get it back to 0. And I always like to use my scale when making sourdough because I find it's a bit more accurate than if I try to do like the U.S. customary, which is, the cups and whatnot. Okay. We've got 100 grams in each one. Let me put my starter over here so I don't bonk it. And then we are going to add 375 grams of warm water. So this is going to be my basic. My next one will do beer. So 375 grams. And that's about a cup and a half. There we go. And I'm going to give it about 2 teaspoons of salt, which is about 10 grams. There we go. And we're going to give it a nice mix to really dilute the starter so it goes evenly into our sourdough bread. There we go. And we're going to do the same here, except instead of water, I'm going to be adding Guinness beer. So this is going to be our beer sourdough. So I'm substituting out just the water for beer, and that will give it a nice kind of a hopsy flavor to our bread tomorrow. And the naturally occurring yeast in the beer will work well with the naturally occurring yeast in the sourdough. Okay. Let's see how much. So it took almost a full can of Guinness. Okay, and we're going to put in our 2 teaspoons of salt. I'm just going to eyeball it. And we're going to give it a nice stir. And we're going to mix this so that the starter gets completely mixed up into our things. And look, you can actually see it's a little bit foamy with the beer as compared to the plate straight up water. It's kind of cool. Let me give our bacon a quick stir. I don't want it to burn at the bottom before some of the fat has sweated out. There we go. And now we're going to add 500 grams of bread flour to each one. And you want to make sure you use an unbleached bread flour. So 500 grams is about 3 cups. But again, I always use my scale because 1 cup can be off by almost 50 grams because of whether there's a hole, like a gap in your flour, or you've packed it in much firmer. So I always use the scale, and my breads turn out great every single time. Let's see. There we go. So we're going to put 500 grams of flour in there. And then we're going to do 500 grams of unbleached bread flour for the other one. And then we're going to use our dough whisk to mix them up. A little bit more. Okay. We're going to just, whoop. That's okay. Not too much mist came out. And then we're just going to use our dough whisk, and we're going to mix it around until the flour is completely incorporated into the sourdough and beer mixture. You can see it's giving it a nice, lovely kind of brown color from the Guinness. And the dough is always sticky in the beginning because the flour hasn't completely hydrated yet. And so the longer it sits, the less sticky it will become. So there we go. So what we're going to do is we're going to let this sit while we're prepping the rest of it, and then we'll do our stretch and fold. And so just like our normal sourdough, every 30 minutes, 20 to 30 minutes after we've mixed it up, we do a stretch and fold. And we do about anywhere between 4 to 6 good stretches and folds in it. And then we will let it sit to do kind of its first bulk rise. But you really need to make sure you do the stretches and folds because that's going to give you that nice crumb at the end, and it's going to really allow the gluten chains to break and form up nicely. So here we're almost done. And again, also, I like to use warm water because it just helps the flour hydrate a bit faster. So we've got our 2 doughs. I'm just going to shake it off because we don't need our dough whisk anymore. And we're just going to let them sit here until we're done prepping the rest of our dinner for tonight. I do have my oven preheating to 325 degrees. And the reason why is because we're going to pop this Dutch oven in there and we're going to bake it for 3 hours at 325. So let's prep up our oxtail. Let me grab my salt right over here before we do that. We're going to season each one of these up, and then we'll start prepping things because after we're done sauteing up the bacon, we're going to take it out and we're going to saute our ox in that as well. So we're going to do a nice sprinkle of black pepper on all of our oxtails. And if you've never seen oxtail before, you can literally see the tailbone in there. So it's literally, it's just cut up. It's delicious. This will be like a really tender, almost like a beef stew if you've had it, but like a really tender beef. It's so good, like short ribs almost. There we go. So we used probably about a teaspoon of black pepper here. Not too much, but we want to make sure we kind of coat all of that so they get a nice seasoning. And then we're going to just sprinkle also a little bit of salt over each one before we kind of brown them off. Because we want to brown each one because that's going to lead to a really nice texture on our meat when it slow cooks versus it just falling completely apart.
question. Does it taste more like beef or pork?
Tastes more like beef. And you can even see kind of by the color of the meat. It's very red. Where pork is kind of a whiter meat. There we go. Okay. Let's check on our bacon. We're getting there. Probably a few more minutes. But while we'll do that, we're going to prep the rest of our vegetables. Okay, I'm going to give my hands just a quick wash since I was playing with the meat. Okay, so we're going to have one big yellow onion. If you had a smaller one, you might want to use two. But this one's a pretty big guy, so I thought one would suffice for tonight. And so I cut off the ends, and then I'm just going to put a nice little slit, and we're going to just remove this whole top layer because it is not good for cooking with. There we go. And then I'm just going to cut through, and we're just going to do a simple dice on it. So I'm going to make about 4 to 5 slits across, and then we're just going to go back and kind of square it. There we go. And then same here, 4 to 5 slices across. And then you just kind of make little squares. And then I always turn my onion when it gets to the end and it's harder to hold. I kind of turn it up because it's easier to do my last couple of slices that way. The bacon's getting lovely here. And now we're not getting it to a crunchy bacon like you would normally eat. You're just crisping it up a little bit because we're going to be putting it back in here and it's going to be slow cooking for 3 hours. So you don't need the crunch on it. You just want to get most of the fat out so that we can cook our meat in it.
Do you have a question? Was this ever your full-time job being a chef?
No, it was not. I just have always had a passion for cooking. And I will say as a teen, I did get a really great allowance cooking dinner during the week. That's what I did as my family chore. But I never actually was a chef by things. My background in work is in education. So I have my teaching degree, plus I have 2 undergrad degrees, one in early childhood and one in special education. Then I have my master's in early childhood special education and my doctorate in education. It was educational leadership and policy. So education is really my passion, but cooking is also my passion too. But I think if I had to do this as a job and cook, I don't know if it would be as fun. I really like the experimenting and making great flavors parts.
Well, this combines both.
Yes, really it does. Teaching people how to cook and also having fun in here. And just showing all we cook is just what we cook for our family. It's not like we're cooking stuff and then throwing around. Everything I make is literally what my family is eating for the day. And we have a big family, so any given day I'm feeding between 7 and 11 people on any given day. So our immediate family is 7, my husband and I, and then our 5 kids. But then my parents live by, and I also make food for them. So we have them for most of our meals as well. And then a lot of times I have nieces or nephews, or we have friends in the neighborhood over. And so I'm cooked for a whole group. But again, we are going to be eating this oxtail stew tonight for dinner. And it's going to just be so delicious. It's going to slow cook in the oven right now, but we've got to sear off the meat and make it great. And then we have our 2 sourdoughs, our Guinness sourdough and our regular one. I'm going to grab a small plate to put this bacon on because we're going to be tossing it back in. But you do want to remove it while you're browning off the oxtail because you want to be able to get the oxtail on the full surface of the Dutch oven. And this is actually one of the first Dutch ovens I ever bought. I was, I believe, a freshman in college, and I went on eBay and I bought this. It was such a steal. It was a Le Creuset pot, and I think I got it for $50 on eBay. And it was like somebody had clearly burnt something on the bottom of it, but I like cleaned it up and it has been with me forever. And I'm sure this Dutch oven had been with that family forever because it uses the letters, not the numbers. And I think they like discontinued using the letters like over 30 years ago. So this Dutch oven has been around forever. But that just shows you that like investing in a good pot, it's going to be with you forever. I mean, I have had my knives since we've gotten married, and they're what, almost 17 years old, and they still work great. Okay, let's put our oxtail in, and we're going to just start searing them up.
Yeah, 2 questions. Is it your husband behind the camera? And then please show us how to do the Guinness sourdough.
Yes. So my husband is behind the camera. He's my cameraman. And the Guinness sourdough, we've already mixed it up, but you can see it's stretching right over here. But I make it exactly like my basic sourdough, except I switch out the water for Guinness. So I use 375 grams of Guinness, and I warmed it up in the microwave because I like to use warm water.
And we'll post the live.
Yeah, we'll post the live too as well. But it was just 500 grams of bread flour, 100 grams of active starter, and then 375 grams of Guinness and 2 teaspoons of salt. And then I use the dough whisk to mix everything together. Okay, we're gonna prep our carrots while we wait for those to brown. Now, we're not cooking our oxtail all the way through. We're just getting a nice browning on each side because we want that texture to stay. It's going to help keep your meat together when you do a slow cook like this. Otherwise, your meat will just fall apart and be stringy. This will help keep its body, but yet let it to be so tender. And we're just doing a nice little slice on our carrots. You don't have to do them too small or too big. They're going to be slow cooking in there. But one thing that's really nice about carrots is they're a really firm vegetable. And so they can handle the slow cook for 3 hours without going mushy. Now, the potatoes, we're going to be serving this with mashed potatoes because I feel like the sauce makes a lovely gravy. But you could also, like the last 30 minutes of baking, you could throw in some baby potatoes and cook them in the juices, and those will also be great. But potatoes are something you have to do in towards the end because they don't hold their form quite as well as a carrot does. Okay, let's flip this guy. You see we've got a nice browning on there. Perfect. We're just going to flip them all over. And every time I go to the grocery store, I always look. But most of the time, they don't have good oxtail. They only have like a 3-pack, or they have really little ones. And for me, we have such a big family that I always need to be able to buy a minimum 7 to 10 good size. So some of these are pretty hefty, which is perfect for us because we'll be able to share them.
You have a question? How big is that Dutch oven?
This one is, so I told you it's old school. It's a letter F, but that is a 5.5 quart Dutch oven. So it's, I don't know what the number would be now for it, but it's a pretty good size. This is one of my bigger ones. It's not my biggest. I do have my 13.25 quart, which is huge, but this is a good size. If you're like a family of 6, this is a perfect size pot for you because if you go to the 4.5 or even the 3, it's just not big enough. This one's good for slightly larger families. Nobody needs the 13.25. I have it because at Thanksgiving, I am the youngest of 10, and so I have so many siblings. So when we all get together at Thanksgiving and there's like 50 plus people, we are like, we got to do big. And I do all that cooking too. Okay, so our oxtail is almost browned off on each side. There we go. So I'm going to take them out. And don't worry about putting them back on the same plate because all of this is going to go back in the pot and then it's going to cook on slow temperatures for the next 3 hours. Beautiful. Okay. So really we're just searing off the tops and the bottom of them. And now we're going to add in our onions. We're going to add in the onions first. We're going to let them saute up. And then I want to make sure I scrape the bottom of my Dutch oven while they're sauteing because I want to make sure none of the little meat drippings burn on it while we're sauteing them up. There we go. Beautiful. So we've got them coated in that little bit of that bacon grease that's left there. There we go. Now I'm just going to let them brown up for a second while I open up. We're going to be using some tomato paste in a little bit. So let me get that opened. And I always have the hardest time opening the tomato paste cans because they're so little. My little can opener always likes to pop off. There we go. So we've got our tomato paste, and then we're going to put in some garlic in here and you're going to use we're going to use a pretty big heaping spoonful of garlic. It's going to be about 4 to 5 cloves. Okay. We've got a nice kind of browning on our onions here. So that shows me that the caramelization process has started for them. And now we're going to put in a big heaping spoonful of garlic. Stir that up. And we're going to let it cook for just a second. Beautiful. The smell of onions and garlic cooking together always makes you feel like you're an amazing chef. Everyone's like, oh, what's that? It smells so good. And I'm like, it's just onions and garlic. Okay, we've got our carrots here. We're going to toss our carrots in. There we go. We're going to give it a nice stir. Now we're not cooking our carrots for any like kind of tenderizing right now. It's just to get a nice little kind of pan sear on them. So I'm just going to pat them down. And then we're going to be using some thyme, some bay leaves, and then we'll be using some red wine and some broth. So let's get our next seasoning out. Before we add in the broth and all that, we're going to do our dry seasoning. So we're going to put in about a teaspoon and a half of thyme. So I'm just going to measure it out in my hand. There we go. Maybe a pinch more. Let's give it a nice stir. And then we're going to add in a bit more pepper too. About a half a teaspoon, since remember we put some already on our oxtail. Perfect. And then we're going to add in our tomato paste. So we're going to add in, I'm going to use this whole jar because we have so many oxtail. But if you were just going to do 4 oxtail, you just need about 2 tablespoons of tomato paste. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to stir this all the way around and kind of scrape at the bottom of my pan. And we're really letting this tomato paste kind of move around. And then we're going to add some red wine in just a second. Beautiful. So you hear we have the tomato paste has completely covered up our vegetables and our carrots. You can see it lovely. We're going to let it kind of simmer, bring out the flavors to it. And then we're going to be putting in some red wine, and we're going to mix up our beef with bouillon. You could use straight up beef broth if you wanted to, but I like to use bouillon and water. We're going to be putting in 4 bay leaves. When I'm doing a quick stew, I will crush up my bay leaves. But since this is going to be slow cooking for the next 3 hours, I'm just going to leave them whole in here. Okay. And now we're going to pour in our red wine. We need about 3 cups. And I'm just going to eyeball this. I'm just going to pour it in slowly as I'm stirring, making sure I'm scraping the bottom of my pan because we really want to make sure we get all of those drippings off because that's going to add just a great flavor to our oxtail. And you can see how the tomatoes are like really thickening up the tomato paste. It helps lead to a really thick and lovely kind of base. That's why I said this is great to have over mashed potatoes, but you could definitely also just pour your, like put baby potatoes in the last 30 minutes of baking. So we have about 3 cups of red wine in there. And then I'm going to take my spoon and we're going to do a heaping spoonful of beef bouillon right there. And this is going to, and we're going to add some water in, but this is going to give kind of the saltiness to our stew part that's going to really season and tender up our meat, as well as just that lovely beefy flavor in. Let that dissolve, and then I'm just going to add a little bit more water at a time since we're using the bouillon. There we go. And I used so far about 2 cups. I think this should be perfect. Okay, I've made sure I've scraped the bottom off of everything. And now we're going to add our bacon back in. And if you didn't have, you could also use pancetta if you wanted to. We're going to give that a nice stir to mix it up. And then now we're going to bring and put our oxtail back in. And we want to make sure that they're all pretty much submerged. I'm going to turn off my burner because we're going to be popping this back in the oven. So I'm making sure I'm dipping it into this lovely kind of stew braise that we made with red wine and carrots and onions, thyme, and garlic. There we go. Pushing it all in here. Perfect. Now we got one more. Now this is why I had to use my big one. So this is a 5.5 quart, but you see how I was able to put all of those back in there, and that was just about 4 pounds of oxtail. And then we're going to put the lid on, and I'm going to pop this in the oven, and we're going to let it bake at 325 for the next 3 hours. So this is one of those things that you can prep on a Sunday and just forget about it until dinner time. And it really doesn't take that long to do. Let me put this down right here. I forgot I left my burner on high yesterday for our cinnamon rolls. So let's pop this one down. Perfect. Now we go in here and beautiful. And then I'm not even going to set the timer because this is so long and ahead. And now let's do our fold and stretch on our bread, and then we will be done. So when you're making sourdough bread, you have to do for the first, every 30 minutes for the first 2 hours after you do a stretch and fold. So this is the stretch and fold. You kind of just pull it up and push it in. And yes, your dough is a little bit sticky, but that is fine. It's still hydrating into the flour, and it will get less sticky with time. But this is what's going to develop the crumb on it. So beautiful, easy. And then I just do a little coat of flour on my hands, and that helps with the stick. And here's our Guinness beer one, where we just substituted the water for beer. I'm going to just pull. And
how long do you cook the stew for?
This one's going to be in the oven for about 3 hours until it's nice and tender. So it's a slow cooked, and so it's one of those ones that you can take it out a little early, or you can push it a little longer. Well, guys, we are done with our dinner prep today. Thank you so much for joining us. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and don't forget to join us back in about 2.5, 3 hours for our next, for the rest of dinner. Okay, thanks.